I'd like to call the meeting to order. 4 o'clock, December 17th Housing Board meeting. Thank you all for those that are joining us on YouTube and for the representatives from Weston and Sampson who are going to bring us a presentation shortly. Nice to have Drew Jacobs in the audience. Drew has a house up on Strip Gut, and this is his first meeting. And of course, everybody knows Gail. So thanks for coming. And fluid meeting, you know, if you have something to say, just wave your hand. We'd love to hear it. Oh, the the road up to the airport, that stretch of, I don't
Never
know.
heard it called that.
On the rise before you get to the airport. I don't know. Strip Gut. There you go. Okay. Just that section is, yeah. Okay, so anyway, let's see. Public input, we're gonna have that be fluid unless you want to have those, the input that you had from your posting on Block Island Bulletin Board regarding the presentation. I would kind of think we could add that when we're doing the presentation. You had 3 responses?
Yeah. We got 3, emails, just kind of out of the blue on ideas. And so I thought we should accept them as correspondence. Sorry, I thought we should accept them as correspondence. And then for discussion at a next meeting, if possible. One is pretty detailed, and we can't really discuss it under public input other than we have received it. I think that would be probably the proper way to do that. And I do have a public comment given to me to relay when you're ready. Not from those 3.
Okay,
It's just that being asked to look at town land that are, I guess, I think they're called non-conforming lots that, or lots that could be developed that the town owns, could be used for housing, that we, I know the work's been done a few years ago. If we could get those pieces of property and just look at them for development, that is the question that was asked of me, and to put that as an agenda item in the future.
okay. We have done that work in the past, but we could revisit it. Always good to look at. Okay, then let's take a look at the minutes of November 19th. I will entertain a motion. So moved. To approve. Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? I would like to just add one thing on the second page. Towards the bottom, Cindy would like to send out the survey again. I don't think I really mentioned sending out a survey again. I think we were talking about the importance of getting updated information, hopefully through the website. So I wasn't thinking of, a paper survey going out. Yeah. Any other changes or corrections on the minutes? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? So voted. So now, do we have Weston and Sampson with us? Okay. Yes, the minutes were reflected to move the meeting with Weston and Sampson to item number 3, so we could. Yep. Okay. So without any further ado, welcome to our meeting. Sorry, I cannot see Elizabeth. Elizabeth, can you introduce yourself and your colleague?
Sure, I'm
Hi,
happy to. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead, Ashley.
Elizabeth, I don't mean to jump in front of you. Thank you for having us. I'm Ashley Sweet. I'm the project manager for this project with the town. As some of you know, we were before the planning board last week. And after that meeting, had an internal discussion and a discussion with Allison about the value of having a conversation with the affordable, excuse me, with the housing board on these issues. And so Elizabeth Haney is with me as well from Weston and Sampson, and she's been working on this part of the project. And so we thought this meeting would be a good opportunity to have a similar discussion with all of you that we had with the planning board. And that conversation was really kind of a high level conceptual overview of some of the things that we think, with some conversation and some adjustments in policy, that New Shoreham could benefit from in terms of developing or increasing its development of, housing for people on the island, because we know that the need is great. So we're happy to go through that presentation again. If you would find that beneficial. I don't know how many of you were there and already saw that, but we'll really take direction from you, and are just here to have a conversation with about those concepts to try to get a better sense, from the town's perspective, where to focus our efforts in helping you.
Thanks, Ashley. Two of us were present at the meeting, Chris and myself. But if you could kind of do a encapsulated synopsis of the meeting, I think it would be helpful to the other members.
Great. So Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind, maybe a quick overview of some of those concept slides that we talked about with the board.
Yeah, let me make sure I can get this sharing on the right screen. Okay, hold on. Just have to share my screen. Ashley, did you want to talk about the project overview at all?
Yeah, so very, very, very quickly, the town hired Weston and Sampson as part of a municipal technical assistance grant from Rhode Island Housing. The bulk of that work was to update the town's regulations, your zoning and your subdivision regulations, to be consistent with recent changes to the state laws enabling acts for zoning and subdivision. We've worked through, I would say, 99% of that. And the secondary focus was to also look at your existing regulatory framework, go out there into the world, look at what other people are doing, and come back to New Shoreham with some ideas about how to make some policy changes, make some regulatory adjustments, and some of these are also programmatic as well, and bring these ideas back to the town to work through which of these would potentially work in New Shoreham and how we can tailor those to the town's specific needs. So that's where we are in this project, is working through what those concepts are, so that we can help you set yourselves up to implement them.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And so, I'll try to be as brief as I can so we can get as much input from you folks. But so the first section of our presentation focused on existing needs analysis coming from a survey done in 2022 that closed in June of 2022. And so it had 47 respondents, which is about a 10% participation rate for year-round households on the island. And some of the high-level outcomes from that were hearing that among folks who replied to the survey, about 40% are having to relocate seasonally. Some folks reported spending over 60% of their income on housing. There was widespread feedback about the lack of affordable rentals. About a fifth of folks who responded live in employer-provided housing, which is connecting their job security, their housing security to their job security. Seasonal work is a major factor for folks. About half the folks who replied to the survey would prefer homeownership, but high prices keep many in the rental market. And the prices that folks could afford if they were to buy, about half could only afford $300,000 or less. There's some need for accessible units, and about 80% are maybe or definitely interested in deed restricted homeownership. So this is just a graph of the responses. So it's more maybes than yes, but in total, 80% of folks were interested. And this is a chart with the income levels of the survey respondents. So, you know, large numbers of folks making below 100% of AMI, with some folks kind of at some of those higher income tiers, at 120, 140 and above 140. And I won't spend a lot of time going through this HUD AMI chart. I'm happy to go back. I would think you folks kind of understand how HUD income qualifications work, but that's something that often we have to talk through to folks. But just talking about, you know, 80% is the threshold for LMI rental units in Rhode Island, and 120 for homeownership units with the related income categories here. So for the low income threshold for a family of 4 is about 71,000. And so, you know, keeping that in mind, we looked at a high level at the cost context in New Shoreham. So according to Rhode Island Housing Factbook's most recent report, the median income in New Shoreham is about 66,000. There's not enough data about rentals to come up with a median rent. But the affordable home price for somebody making that median income is between 190 and 220, depending on interest rates. And we know those are fluctuating. The affordable rent at median income is about $1,700. And that's in contrast to the median home price, which is 1.6 million. And in order to afford that median home price, you know, you need to be making about $500,000. And that's in a community where, according to the 2021 census data from HUD that looks at kind of households and income categories, there's at least 200 households who make below 80% of AMI in New Shoreham. And so those are kind of that's sort of the affordability cost context. And as you think about, you know, that many households in need, and the folks reporting cost burden and trying to do something about that, we think about the costs of creating new affordable housing. And so to get a sense of sort of where those costs are in the market today, we looked at the most recently public available bids for the O'Brien development, and then just did some back of the envelope math. But what we found was the bids that came in December 2023 were around 7.7 and 7.5 million, inflating those 25% to account for soft costs that would be part of the project. We think that, you know, that project's probably coming in now around $10 million, which means that per unit, that's about $630, $645 per unit in terms of total development costs. And then the table I have at the bottom of this slide is straight from Rhode Island Housing's developer handbook, where they outline their standards for projects that they fund. And so, you know, their total development cost limits for different building types for a cluster subdivision similar to that O'Brien development, you know, what they're saying is that, you know, their limit is $448,000 per unit is their development cost limit. And typically quasi-public state agencies do have some flexibility with that, but you know, those costs that we're estimating at O'Brien are, you know, almost $200,000 more than that limit that Rhode Island Housing is articulating. And so, you know, just to kind of back up at what that means when we look at that typical household that we talked about a couple slides ago, if you're talking about, you know, 640, if we assume it's gone up a little bit at 650, you know, and your median household, if you're looking to produce home ownership, can only afford 220,000, you have a gap of over $400,000 $100,000, every time you want to serve a household. And so the big question that raises is how do you reduce that gap so that your public dollars can go further? You can serve more households with less funding. And so, to walk the planning board through that, we talked about the fact that, you got to look at the development costs and how you can spread those across more units. And just taking the example of the cost of land acquisition, because that was the easiest number to come up with quickly. If we kind of take the O'Brien as a hypothetical and we looked at lots for sale in New Shoreham, and we found that the average was about $1.4 million per acre, roughly. And so, that brought us to potential zoning updates. And so some of those zoning updates were allowing for moderately more dense housing types in more zoning districts. And this is something that, other communities, other seasonal communities are looking at. I have some examples down at the bottom. So, looking at things like cottage courts, duplexes, townhouses, stacked flats, manor houses, walk-ups, walk-up apartments, maybe not. We're not sure that that's contextual to New Shoreham. And the reason that we suggest that is because, we think that this is a familiar housing typology in New Shoreham for some of those housing types. And so it's something that could fit in and house more households, but it also could help to begin to bring down that cost, that if you're putting, more units on that same area of land that's for sale, you can start to bring some of those costs down that you really, really need to do to be able to make projects financially feasible. And so this is just a table we did to sort of illustrate what that would look like. So if you think of a project that's a 2-acre project, and the different housing typologies I showed in the previous slide, if you had 4 cottages on a 2-acre lot, that land acquisition cost per unit at the 1.4 per acre is about $350,000 per unit in terms of just the land acquisition cost. And if you increased the density to something like a stacked flat where you have 16 to 30 units, or even a manor house, maybe you can fit 24, but you're able to reduce the land acquisition cost per unit by almost $300,000. So that's, the most extreme example. I don't know that we think 24 units is the right fit for New Shoreham, but just to give you an example of what that does to the cost per unit, as you start to kind of move up the continuum in this chart, you start to have more economies of scale in terms of those costs that can be shared across one site. And so, in addition to that, some of our suggestions were also looking at how to just make the zoning a bit more flexible in the context of New Shoreham, where land costs are so high and development costs are so high. So there are some restrictions on what you have to do if you want to use a planned development district. So we'd suggest revising that a bit. And then kind of shifting gears to a similar but slightly different concept. We think that exploring subdivision for affordable ADUs is something that might be worth exploring. And so we had some, rough back of the envelope costs about that coming from numbers we adjusted from Cape Cod. So back in January 2023, Housing Resource Center, a nonprofit in Provincetown, estimated that it costs $360 to build an 800 square foot ADU. And so, inflating that for construction costs and the cost of building on New Shoreham as an island, we think that it might cost somewhere around $430,000 to build an ADU, a similar ADU in New Shoreham. But we're happy to adjust our math if you folks have more information. And so, doing some back of the envelope math on that, if a homeowner in New Shoreham wanted to finance the cost of building an ADU at that price, if they used a home equity line of credit or cash out refinance at 7% interest with a 20-year loan, annually, they'd be paying about $41,000. And so that would come out to about $3,400 a month. And so if they were looking to use rent to pay for that, and they were hoping to rent to the median household in New Shoreham, they would have a big gap because, as we talked about a few slides before, the median household in New Shoreham could only afford about $1,700 a month. And so if that income, was going to support that loan that a homeowner wanted to take out to build an ADU, it only would get them about halfway there. $1,700 a month supports a 20-year HELOC of about $215,000. And so that's why we think a couple different ideas related to ADUs. So allowing for smaller subdivision of lots to increase the economies of scale related to the land, as well as exploring how you might be able to condoize newly created ADUs to bring homeownership within reach. And so those are kind of zoning related enforceable policy changes. We think that there are other programmatic changes that could be paired with those changes, depending on which way you want to go. Doing more analysis of some of the kind of back of the envelope things that I just mentioned. So evaluating or updating the survey on current housing needs, talking to folks on the island about, the costs and tipping points for affordable and market housing production, talking to folks who are producing housing in New Shoreham or in, other places nearby in Rhode Island, talking to the folks who are doing this work about what would be most impactful, and then also paying attention to your existing affordable housing stock, just to be sure that you're not going to lose any housing that you already have. And so we also said that, it might help to have housing organizations with more capacity that can kind of push this work on forward at a more regular pace. They might be able to support a community land trust. They might be able to support an ADU program. They might be able to support increased collaboration with the conservation groups working on the island. And so a community land trust is something that's fairly popular in seasonal island communities. I've worked with several, something that folks are looking at on Cape Cod. But a community land trust could exist within an existing nonprofit, or it could be created as a new nonprofit. And so community land trusts typically do affordable homeownership utilizing a ground lease model, and then they steward those properties long term. And typically they're a community controlled nonprofit. As I mentioned before, could look into creating an ADU support program. So that could involve providing coaching or technical assistance, pre-approved designs. We know that's something, that's kind of already in the works, or providing loans. And there's some examples. These are all examples on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard for different types of programs that are in place to support the creation of ADUs. So it kind of ranges from technical assistance to actual financial assistance through loans or grants. And then I mentioned before, but creating collaboration between conservation nonprofits and affordable housing nonprofits. Things that you can do are policies of geographic non-competition, doing cooperative acquisitions, and aligned public education. Martha's Vineyard is kind of the biggest example of that. And then something else that is happening in Massachusetts, they've just created something called the Seasonal Communities Designation. And communities in Massachusetts that are designated as seasonal communities have the ability to provide tax incentives to homeowners who offer year-round rentals. And then there also are other actions from, directly from your comprehensive plan. And so this is just a list here. So I think I heard some about this earlier as you folks were getting online, but identifying additional sources of funding, town and private properties as potential sites, monitoring deed restrictions, monitoring ADUs and tax abatement, evaluating senior and special needs, acquiring and holding lands for future development, evaluating the tax assessment policies and exploring a homestead tax exemption, and then investigating a housing subsidy program for workers. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I ran through that whole thing. I didn't stop for any questions, but we're excited to talk through any of that resonated with you now.
That's pretty well. Yeah. Thanks very much. Good to hear it, even for the second time. Chris and I were there, and I think Gail was in the on the planning board. The good news when we first heard this presentation, from my perspective, is it was very affirming because the housing board somehow has almost everything you spoke of is on our radar. So there weren't many brand new concepts, but it was very affirming to see that, you know, we had a lot of the ideas. The challenge, of course, and where I'm hoping you're going to be able to help us, is it's great to have the ideas and to have identified the issues, but how then do we move forward? So I'm hoping that you know, being able to work together with you, we'll get some handles on how to move from the conceptual ideas to actually plans and legislation or programs that will actually help us.
I have a few questions.
Chris has a couple questions. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, I was wondering if you did receive a survey that was done by an ad hoc group. I think its data is really close to what you have. I asked that the land use officer send it to you, but I think she just sent it back to me, my mistake. So do you have that?
Do you know what the title is?
It looks crazy because of the way it was expanded onto the screen with screen prints to make it work for the presentation. So
Yeah.
it was taken from spreadsheets, so
Okay.
pie charts, and I don't remember the title of it, but it would probably be like Block Island Affordable Housing Initiative, or it was all by volunteers.
Okay.
They did a monkey survey or survey monkey effort, and we got 50 respondents. But in going with it, I noticed how similar your results were with ours, because I was part of that. And you
So
said you were looking
Chris,
to update that
I
survey, so I'm wondering if that would be helpful.
they were provided with a couple surveys. One that the housing board did, and then I when they showed me that, you know, they had located that, I said, well, the town had undertaking a survey more recent, and the so I gave them the results of that. But I think Chris is actually mentioning another survey that was prior to this town one. So there might have been a third one. So we'll make sure that they have that as well. But I think, yeah, the community, the survey, the grassroots group that did the survey, maybe the town one followed that one. Similar, might have been some similar questions, but not identical.
Okay. Another question I have for you, given your observations, they're pretty familiar, similar to what I think I'm concluding at least, is that most likely, unless we're receiving a benefactor's gift, we're not going to be able to really to affect land costs much. And we are under discussions with how to reduce construction costs, but I don't think it's going to move the needle that much. And so in my opinion, I call those the demand side things. What I'm trying to figure out is how to increase the supply side of this. And to me, that is funding. And so things such as a community land trust are of interest to me, of moving taxation around to dedicate it more towards affordable housing, I think is also something. But if we don't increase the supply side, the funding, we'll never close that $250,000 gap between our construction costs and the affordability. So I'm wondering if you have, you gave us some ideas on how to, I think, increase supply, money, you know, monetary supply. Anything in particular you think that is most appropriate for our community? Thank you.
Ashley, I mean, I can speak to some of the things that we've heard working in communities facing similar kind of challenges on the cost of land. I'm not totally sure of the context around these, how these are in New Shoreham at the moment. But two things that have been discussed in Jamestown, where we are working, are fees on building permits as a source of revenue for affordable housing, as well as transfer taxes at the point of sale on properties as a source of income for an affordable housing trust. I I believe from my research that New Shoreham already has a transfer fee, if I'm recalling correctly, that goes towards conservation. Is that accurate?
Ashley, we have a 3% fee that is levied on every real estate transaction. And that money goes to the Block Island Land Trust, and it is used for conservation purchases and stewardship. There is a 1% fee on vacation rentals, short-term rentals. That 1% fee accrues to our board, the Housing Board. Right now, we're slightly under $200,000 a year. That number edges up every year, very slightly. And that is our income stream that we have used to leverage thus far for the projects that we've done. One of my interests you just mentioned was impact fees, the possibility of the town leveraging some impact fees on new construction. I'm not terribly familiar with how, how that's set up, whether the town needs legislation or the town can unilaterally do that. To what degree do other communities, what their rates are like? Do you have any impact, information on how that impacts communities that have?
So
fees?
I can speak generally to impact fees. Definitely something that you would want to discuss, I think, in detail with your solicitor. Impact fees are pretty heavily regulated by state law, and are really designed to offset the impact that that specific house has on town services. And so there's a requirement under state law that you have a needs analysis that's done. That needs analysis ties your impact fee to your capital program and is supposed to only be spent on capital funds. So I would not want to say that you could shift that impact fee to the development of affordable housing without, your solicitor confirming that that would still align with the intent of an impact fee under state law, because you're required to have that needs analysis. That impact fee does have to be spent on a capital expenditure. So you can't spend impact fees on soft costs. You have to spend them on infrastructure or hard costs. Again, I don't feel comfortable telling you one way or the other. If you could shift that impact fee to the development of affordable housing, I think that's something you'd have to explore on the legal side with your legal counsel. But that's not to say that you couldn't use some other kind of fee, just because I know that impact fees specifically are regulated by state law and are pretty confined in terms of what they can be used for.
Good input. On the positive side, that's kind of levying a fee on people. On the positive side, the idea of taxation benefits for people that are either creating ADUs that are going to be rented year round. It seems logical to me to have a taxation policy that gives those homeowners a break on their property taxes, or the idea that you just mentioned, some sort of consideration for homeowners that choose to rent their properties year round. There's not that many year-round rentals out here. A lot of the property owners, because of the vacation nature of this place, they want to use their property for some time of the year themselves. So it's hard to get owners that are really motivated to rent on a year-round basis. But the folks that we're encouraging to do the ADUs would seem that a tax benefit could be a little bit more of a encouragement to them. Millie's
And,
got.
The town council right now is exploring that tax benefit. It does require legislation, a change to legislation. So that is something that they're focusing on, and along with Amy town, town interim town manager. So she's, so that's it sounds like that's one of their goals.
From a zoning perspective, Gail and I were talking today about ADUs and the requirements about ADUs. And one point is that you can put up an ADU and you could rent it to someone who gains their livelihood from summer employment out here. But you can only have an ADU like that in commercial zones. And I was just, made me think, would it be so bad to have a wider range of zones that is allowed in? Since summer housing is, I won't say it's as much of a problem, but it is a significant problem out here too. So I don't know, from a zoning and planning board perspective, what your thoughts are on that.
So I'm not sure how much you're aware of the recent changes to the enabling legislation for ADUs, but the cities and towns have had much of their control over where ADUs can occur and how they can occur, taken away from them. ADUs have become a by right use under certain circumstances, and those circumstances are it's a relatively low bar to meet. And so they are permitted in New Shoreham as an accessory to a single family home if they meet one of 3 criteria, which I said again are pretty low bars to meet. And that's by virtue of state law without the town, enacting it in their local zoning.
So your, what I understand is, your area of expertise is really assisting the town in, revising, taking hard looks at zoning and planning regulations, helping us to create ordinances that are going to, align with state regs with all the new changes, but also looking at regulations that could help us increase the production of affordable housing. So your main area of expertise is in that whole regulatory process. Is that correct?
I mean, we're all planners, and we all have slightly different areas of expertise. Elizabeth has a lot of background in housing, which is why she's here with us. I have a lot of experience in the regulatory framework, and our job is also, not just to assist you on the regulatory side, but also to give you, if you have interest in the programmatic elements, we can give you some recommendations and kind of best practices so that if you did want to pursue those types of things, you would have kind of some sort of structure there to get your feet on the ground, to get yourselves started for those. But yes, we also would want to work with you if there are regulatory changes that could be made. We can help with those. We can give you guidance and direction on, and even talking through, what are the right changes to make? How far should we go? And I'll use the ADU as an example. The state requirements supersede any of your local requirements, where if you are not permitting something that the state does permit as a by right, the state supersedes your local ordinance. But you are also permitted to go further. So you could be less restrictive than the state requirements and look at ADUs from the perspective of, this is the baseline that the state has set. What can New Shoreham do in addition to that? And that's where we came in with thoughts about maybe there's a possibility for condoizing an ADU, or even setting up parameters where an ADU could be subdivided it wouldn't work under traditional circumstances to just subdivide to create new single family homes, but maybe there's a way to structure an ordinance so that you could allow an ADU to be separated from the single family home, which in that circumstance, you would essentially take one single family home and one ADU and turn that into two single family homes and two ADUs on the same footprint, basically, where you're getting, instead of getting 2 units, you're getting 4 units. So those are the kind of concepts that we wanted to discuss with you and see where the interest lies. And then, again, the devil is in the details. You have to dig in and kind of start to structure what that would look like. But from taking a couple steps back, wanted to put these options in front of you and see what resonated and see, what are the things that you've been talking about, so that we can make sure that we focus our efforts in alignment with where the housing board has been trying to go.
Well, we have been looking, we have a couple of wonderful community members that have been assisting us, and they've done a lot of research on various programs, specifically Martha's Vineyard, Cape Cod, and the other islands. One program that they brought to us is a rent back program where I think it's on Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, that they compensate owners that are renting their property and give them some financial stipend to induce them to rent on a year-round basis. That, is an interesting idea, but you've got to have a source of funding. And as Chris was alluding to before, getting funds is a major problem for us. Our cost basis kind of has put us out of the running in getting grants from Rhode Island Housing and other state programs. So there's a lot of stuff out there, but funding is a real issue. That's not your area of expertise, but we would certainly be welcome in hearing from you any other success stories from communities that you might be dealing with on how they are getting funds. If it's not impact fees, if it's not community land trust, what else is out there for us is a big problem.
I'll let Elizabeth chime in if she has any thoughts, but I think the reality and what we tried to express is that your gap is unusually high because of the cost of land, because of the cost of construction. So it's, I think you'll need to think about this in terms of stacking strategies to make, to reduce that gap. So while looking for opportunities for funding sources so that you can, lower the gap, I think you're going to have to couple that with other strategies in order to get that gap down far enough that you can either become competitive with Rhode Island Housing, or you can reduce the gap enough that it becomes a manageable gap. So when you couple something like, increasing density, but not making it look like you're increasing density and spreading those land costs, then the funding that you are able to capture can go that much further.
That's pretty much the position that we're in right now on our current project, West Side Road, is we realize that as designed, as anticipated, we are not able to fund that project. So we're in a position where we need to reevaluate, and increasing density is a huge part of that, to try to make it more affordable. Anybody else got
And
anything to
I can
chime in?
I can I can just add in a little bit about community land trust. I helped to start a community land trust in Somerville, Mass, and worked nationally with community land trusts. And so I would just say community land trusts are a wonderful model. They're incredible, but they're not magic when it comes to the problems we were just talking about in terms of the cost of land and the cost of running an organization long term. So the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network out of Massachusetts, as well as Island Housing Trust on Martha's Vineyard, you know, they're working together in Massachusetts to advocate for increased sources of funding. And you know, that might be something that does resonate with New Shoreham, is identifying the other communities in the state who are facing the same problems as a legislative coalition to, you know, articulate, you know, to the wider state of Rhode Island that, you know, this is an issue, that there are similar issues in Jamestown and Newport. The scale may be slightly different, but you know, you are unique in the scale of the cost, but like there are other communities facing this who, you know, are needing to find additional ways to fill major gaps in terms of land costs and development costs. And you know, if you can figure out ways to fill that gap, that's when programs like Community Land Trust can start to add units and, you know, get to scale. But you really need to have those income sources and to be acquiring units to have an organization like that really kind of get to scale and be functional.
Anybody else? I had one more question. Data collection has been identified as a major front runner problem for us. Data is fluid and short-lived. The life of the data is short-lived. When we need to find out how many people, how many units of housing are we aspiring towards, you know, it's a fluid number. So we are hoping to quickly get an online questionnaire that we can have people sign up and let us know what their needs are, and that we can easily keep in touch with them as their needs change or as their, you know, their needs are satisfied, so that we have a better handle on how many units we are aspiring towards. Any input on that from you guys? How best to achieve getting that data captured and workable?
It's wonderful to hear folks who want to be so clued in on those needs. I think that's wonderful. It sounds like a lot of work and a lot of technology to stay up on that. I think a lot of that is a lot of this. If this continued success of that will be on relationship and reliability, and making sure that whoever is collecting that data is available, you know, to be there in 2 years if somebody's needs change and they need to update that. I can't think of any precedents off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean that I'm not saying kudos for having that as a goal.
And I think, you know, to just add to what Elizabeth just said, I think it is hard data to collect because it is a shifting situation. But the benefit that you do have is that you're relatively small, and it's a lot more manageable of a concept to think about, you know, collecting that data and maintaining that data when you have, you know, a smaller population to collect from. And I think Elizabeth, you know, offered some insight there as well about relationship building and the town really, you know, making sure that people are aware that the housing board can be a resource, and that the housing board is definitely paying attention to this issue, and that people should be encouraged to share that, you know, share their information with the housing board or whatever entity is decided will hold this information, and to continually update that. I mean, I think that you just have to put the message out there repeatedly and get people comfortable with reporting that kind of stuff to the town or to an organization. It's not stuff that people are traditionally forthcoming with, you know, reporting income and need, and, you know, the fact that they may struggle with housing costs. So I think, you know, a campaign on behalf of the town to just make sure that people in the community are aware that you're out there, you're looking for this information, you're collecting it, you're maintaining it so that you can do the best that you can to meet the needs of people, and that if you don't know what their needs are, you're unable to really help them. I don't think that there's you know, a set way to kind of collect this data. It's dependent on individuals you're collecting from, and it's also you know, community dependent. But I think the best thing that the town can do is really foster a sense of understanding in the community that you know, that's why you're asking information, and that's why you're asking for it to be continually updated, because it provides the town with the ability to really focus on where the need is and serve that need.
Anybody else have questions for Ashley and Elizabeth? I guess my last question then would be, okay, what's the action plan here? How do we proceed in trying to explore? We've got some of the taxation issues, the impact fees, the zoning issues. Are you primarily going to be working with the planning board? You know, I think those are the areas that we would have an interest in. How can we help to foster that discussion, or where do we go from here?
Good question. And I think, you know, as far as we are concerned, we will take our direction, you know, from whoever the town kind of wants to say, you know, this is the direction we're going to move in. We've been working directly with Allison on this project, and would continue to look to her as the town's representative, whether it be that we move forward with the housing board or the planning board, or both, or some combination of that. You know, we're happy to do either of those things. We do want to make sure that the portion of this project dedicated to kind of helping with these strategies gets focused on those that you feel would be most beneficial to the town. So maybe that's I don't know, maybe that's a coordinated conversation between the housing board and the planning board. I'm kind of leaving that to Allison to strategize, and really for us to take direction from her.
We'll certainly definitely want to keep both the planning board and the housing board involved and engaged in the process. And it may be, and we want the housing board's input and planning board members' input on what direction to go and what strategies that you feel would be most beneficial, that you'd be most interested in Weston and Sampson exploring further. So that's why, you know, they've come to both boards to get your input and guidance. But, you know, it could be, depending on the strategies that are identified, which board is more involved, right? Depending on, you know, if it's regulatory zoning changes that happen, the planning board's going to need to be more engaged versus something programmatic relating to the housing board, like having to implement, you know, whether that be the community land trust concept. And one question I had on that is you know, if we're going to go kind of explore that further, how the land trust, like the block when Elizabeth, you mentioned you were involved in setting that up. Is it something that it's both like a housing organization and an existing land trust, or is it just a completely new organization, or could it be these two existing organizations combined to create that program?
So like nationally, there's a few that are combined, both like a community land trust and a conservation land trust, but those examples are less frequent than them existing as independent organizations. And so I would guess that it probably would show up either, or that it would show up as an independent nonprofit that started up, that was kind of working on its own and then like developing a relationship with the Conservation Land Trust, just for the benefit of the mission, because I think it can be a lot for an existing nonprofit to take on new program areas when they've been functioning for a really long time with one mission to kind of move into another sector. So I would guess that it would probably be a separate organization whose mission was dedicated towards housing, and then identifying ways to work with the Conservation Land Trust.
Maybe, this is Chris, maybe the next step for us to take then is to consider forming a subcommittee with the planning, housing and planning, forming a subcommittee with members to explore these options along with our town planner, and then come back to our respective boards and see what seems to have the most traction, most favorability. But it seems like we do have to sit down, housing has to sit down with planning much more and coordinate this approach.
At the last meeting, Margie, I believe, asked the board, our board, to send them a memorandum to planning on some of the things that we would like to focus on. So that could be our starting point, perhaps, is just articulating the things that we're resonating with to the planning board, and then hopefully interfacing with planning at a deeper level. Does that sound like a way to go, guys? So Allison, we'll try to articulate what's resonating with us that may impact town and planning and zoning issues.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, to get that input, you could share it, and I'll share it with Weston and Sampson in advance of the next planning board meeting. And if you have a couple folks from your board that want to, if we have just with Ashley and Elizabeth staff, like check in, if you want to have someone join, I can have a planning board member join just for that informal kind of guidance, we can do that as well.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your time and for your work.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
We'll be in touch.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Bye.
So, I think if we can just take a couple minutes to just brainstorm what we heard and the things that we would like to bring back to planning and to these guys. Anybody want to start to articulate?
Just use your mic so people
The density factor was brought up a lot, and I don't remember originally how many we could put on the property or how much we could develop, but
There are density bonuses for affordable housing, but I don't think I can articulate exactly what the ordinance says. Anybody? Yeah, I couldn't do it by heart, but the density bonuses for affordable housing could be revisited, okay?
or even just the density to bring the costs down,
Well, that would be
the bonus.
the bonus of it, yeah, yeah. Okay, that's good.
So the community land trust, is that something that would kind of be similar to our conservation land trust, the Black Island Land Trust, although that we would be collecting a fee on real estate? Is that, I mean, I probably should have asked this to Weston Sampson, but
I think it's how we make it.
yeah, and
To me, with the increasing value of property, that seems to be not low-hanging fruit, but it seems to be readily accessible fruit, where it's not an impact fee, unless you consider just conserving more and more land and impact fee, but we'd have to make a case for that. But I think with the rising value of land, that is really a plausible source to tap into for this.
I mean, I agree. I've kind of felt that way for a while. I know that the land trust, they have, this town council sets that fee. And I think it's at 3%. And I feel like because of where this is my personal opinion, that's all. I feel like where we are with conservation out here now is that there's room to bring that fee down. So that covers the stewardship, maybe covers any more, additional projects, but there's a lot of money that's coming into the land trust, and which is great, but I don't know if the need is as strong as it was. And now the needs, I feel like, could be, so maybe if some of that money could then be harvested without an increase in that fee, but you have to create a new organization in order to harvest that fee. So if we could do a 1.5 and a 1.5, granted, where I think we're looking at years before you can actually get that legislation enacted, because it does require, it would require legislation, but if they're an organization that can help put something like that together, that we could get in front of our legislators next year, then I think that, I would be on board. Of course, I think that's a great idea, but I speak only.
I agree 100%. I think that's spot on. And given the politics of how the state overrode everybody's zoning and planning to make ADUs more possible, I think the timing is right for
Yeah,
this.
it's certainly an affordable housing positive, time right now.
I'm a little slow to understand the ramifications of that. So you would see that it would need to be yet another organization that say the fee could be adjusted, the amount that's adjusted couldn't automatically flow through legislation, flow to the housing board. You think it would have to be a community?
I have no
a
idea.
separate community land trust in addition?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's probably a good conversation to have with, with Elizabeth there.
Mhm.
But my sense is that, or it would mean a major amendment to our legislation, and maybe
We would have to go,
would
we would have
work.
to go for legislation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You'd have to get the land trust to agree to the decrease, and we would have to go for legislation.
You'd have to get the town council to do that. It's the town council sets the fee.
True, but.
But the land trust, yeah, you definitely want the land trust. I'm just saying,
You
just
buy it,
remember, the
yeah.
land trust gets that fee set by the town council. And if you read my analysis of the land trust enabling legislation, I think, we could have attorneys look at it, but I think that avenue is there for the funds to be dedicated to us under their existing legislation. But if not, then we'd have to change it. But we need people who are experts to look at that synopsis and see if, under the current legislation, the land trust could divert money to housing for this purpose. And if not, then we'd have to take the next step and make it so, with hopefully the land trust on board, supporting this, and the town council, the town.
Next question. So it's the 3% fee that you're talking about, and you're talking about lowering it for the land trust, but then diverting the money to us.
Right, capping it, we're not saying. in
Not
excess of
increasing it to
3.
5 or anything, just
So
trying to-
within that parameter of 3, is there some percentage that could be siphoned off specifically for affordable housing?
Yeah.
And I think we really need to test the water for the appetite on that, and it needs to have a lot of lobbying, you know, to get people
agree.
on board before you spring uh, such a, yeah,
But it has to start somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
the concept, the
I agree.
conversation, the concepts have to start somewhere.
Gail Ballard.
Hi, I have to run, but I'm very interested in becoming involved in all of this with everybody. And I do think I agree with Millie and Chris and everyone on the land trust idea. And possibly it may be more palatable if there is a community land trust created. So it isn't just affordable housing. We can talk with Elizabeth further about what community land trust entails, what all it covers, what other funding it provides for, including affordable housing, if there is other ideas that it funds or other areas that it funds. But anyway, yeah, I just want to let you know, I thank you, everyone, for what you're doing. And I haven't been voted by the planning board to become involved as a planning board member, but I'll talk to Margie about it. We're interested in becoming more engaged
Collaborative,
in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, because
Sure.
that's really, we need more communication between the various parts of town to make
Yeah.
sure we're all going in the same direction. So really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gail.
Bye, Gail.
Would the land trust be willing to share their percentage with us?
We've been talking.
I think that would take a lot of
We were supposed to have a meeting with
discussion
them.
and movement and lobbying, and I think the time is ripe, you know, where people do feel that we've reached that plateau with land acquisition.
Conservation.
So we're almost at 50%.
Do you think they would agree with that or?
Well, I think it would take a lot of lobbying. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't think it would be a slam dunk.
Yeah.
No, but I think the community could be a big ally.
I went to the last, Chris, I went to the last housing board meeting because they were talking about their survey and they said that land, yeah, sorry, land trust, and they, you know, said they didn't get any responses from us to their questions. But so Barbara McMullen did include some of the discussion that Cindy and I had with them when they were first starting their survey. And she put out, well, maybe you guys should get your own 1% fee through state legislation. So to your point, Cindy and Josh and everybody else here, I think they've become aware that things need to change. You know, you can't keep doing the same thing forever. You have to be cognizant of the situation. What's it called? Reading the room. And that's what's
Right, and
going
they need
on.
to really, I mean, they really have changed.
They really have, and they are becoming allies, and I think they are sensitive to the issue. You know, change is hard.
Yeah.
Change is really hard,
Sure.
and I think that they appear. Chris, correct me if you disagree, but I think they appear to be pretty adamant that they don't want to change their legislation, but I don't think they're opposed to us. Well, that might be an overstatement. I don't think they would potentially be opposed to us seeking our own legislation.
But wasn't there some kind of clause that, any new purchases, right, Chris, that?
That was what we asked for them to include when Cindy and I went there
we would
going
have to
forward.
Change legislation for that?
No.
I don't think so. If you read their legislation, they could have done it from day one, but they just chose not to.
Well, I think the land trust has participated in the past. They have purchased easements on various properties. In fact, the very first one they did was was Beacon Hill Road. Their purchase of the easement, the open space on that 7-lot subdivision was the difference between being able to buy that property or not.
Mhm.
So they do have a history of participating in affordable housing and our acquisitions. They have opened the door to the Champlain Marina thing. Housing is a component there. So, they're much more open-minded. So I think we need to continue to foster that relationship of being an ally. And they seem to be open to it. Barbara's been very receptive. Other things, okay, so we have density, community land trust ideas, talking about our existing land trust and how that fee could be adjusted. What else? For a memo for the planning board. I'd like to look at the taxation question.
Yeah.
The town is starting to do that with or has done that with the.
break.
Yeah, tax incentives for,
Yeah, and what was discussed was a tax break for, where they just adopted the homestead exemption.
Yep.
And the homestead exemption does not cover anyone who is not a year-round resident, but who rents to somebody year-round, whether it's a 513 or what the apartment or something like that. So I believe the intention is to offer that same kind of homestead exemption number to those who are providing year-round housing.
Mhm.
And that will be going, as I understand it, will be going to the legislature for this round.
that aspect of.
Yes.
Oh, so they're already on it.
They're on it.
Okay, great. So then we want to just
I mean, we want to
be the cheering section.
Yeah, and we want to look at what they're, what they're presenting or
Mm-hmm.
proposing, and then maybe give them some feedback on that. But I anticipate we're going to be seeing a resolution regarding that in January or early February.
Okay. So taxation for that.
And who is doing that?
The town council.
Town council. So that's good. What about the idea of exploring, increasing the zones that ADUs are allowed where people could be
If it
provided?
hasn't
summer.
already happened, I think it's very important to allow all throughout the island.
ADUs in all,
Yeah,
That was,
but that
Well-
may have been part of what was just adopted last
pretty sure.
month.
I think they are allowed in all zones, but
But it was.
not but only in the commercial zone for summer help. For summer housing.
I don't remember seeing that at all.
That's what Gail Ballard told me.
It is, no, it is, that is true.
I-
There was a restriction about commercial only.
But
I don't know
the-
whether that changed or not
That-
in
that
this
changed.
new
Oh,
round of
changing again.
adoptions. So that's a question for
All right, so just,
land use.
But the
It can go on the
zone
list.
was, like, commercial zones wouldn't have to be year round, it could be summer.
right, because currently only, my understanding was if you have a ADU in zone A, you could rent it, say, to the National Hotel because they're employing summer people. But
And that's already,
no,
no,
you can only do that if you had something in the commercial zone,
okay, yes.
supposedly. I don't know. But the concept of ADUs in all zones for all purposes works.
Yeah, is at least worth talking about.
Okay. Anybody want to salute the flag of impact fees? Josh, I'm sure you have something to say about impact fees.
About
What I
what?
was hearing from them was that it's very regulated by the state. And
I think it's
It's
like
also
something like
tied-
sewer, water, those kinds of
right, and
things,
so
not
so
necessarily
little of,
housing.
so little of the island is on sewer and water. Most of the people that are building houses, their kids don't even go to school here, so I don't know what the impact of these houses is on town.
Mhm.
So it might not have a lot of traction.
It is interesting, though. I think it is probably worth asking, as a follow-up. She did reference Jamestown was including a fee, and that she suggested when she was talking about, enlarging or encouraging housing. And what is that fee that Jamestown is going to be implementing on their building fees and their building permits? Just out of curiosity to see, are we missing something there?
Yeah, because there are some communities that especially vacation wealthy communities that actually require you to either provide housing or a financial donation. If you don't want that little unit on your property, you provide a financial donation to have it be on somebody else's property. I think Aspen, those areas.
I've never heard that. That's
Well, I
big.
also think that we need to start having some enforcement on the existing ADUs, because I feel like we're losing them. Because people get permitted to build these things, they rent them for a couple of years, and then they do whatever they want.
Well, they do a certification every 2 years, and Jen is you are now in charge of that. It used to be something that Mark did. And it is an inspection every 2 years. They go in and they also have to provide a lease and an affidavit that is recorded on the land evidence records that says that they're doing, what they should be doing with that. But it does require the submission of a lease, and it requires an in-person inspection. And that will be done again starting in 2025. So we're right there.
Okay.
So it's much more stepped up.
Yeah, there's definitely, to say that it doesn't get, there may be, I think that last round, there were maybe 8 or so that weren't in compliance that were then, I think, removed from the batch.
Also, with the housing initiative, giving grants to folks, I believe they have 5 or maybe 6 applications in the hopper somewhere along the zoning spectrum. And I would think that the ones that they are involved in making grants to, that they will also have a second layer of oversight. At least for those, I think.
That is receiving money.
Yeah.
All right, well, that sounds like I think we have a good.
Okay,
list
so
there.
the challenge then is, I've got density bonus for affordability, community land trust, talking about the land trust, our existing land trust and potential of sharing the fee. Taxation incentives for ADUs in all zones, enforcement on existing ADUs. Anything else we want to include to the planning board?
I think we should just stop there and see what we can get.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get some small victories here instead of having a shotgun and missing what we're going for. Just
Is the sharing of fees, is that more of a town council question, or is that?
It's I see it as a community question, for, talking to the land trust about it. Talking to the council about it, at least, sidebar, maybe not formally yet, talking to the community about it, trying to gauge with what's the appetite, and would you get people on board, I think, before you kind of go and make a major presentation where people are like, what?
Yeah.
You can't
Can't come out of left field on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be something that grows. There's got to be a
Yeah.
groundswell of support. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
right, but starting those conversations is, I guess, is timely.
All right, I will, unless somebody else wants to raise their hand, I'll try to put this in a memo form, and I will share it with you guys. But let's not wait till next meeting, because we need to get something.
No, I feel like
Back to-
we can just go ahead and send, yeah. we can send it. Yeah.
All right, so I'll try to do something there. All right. Good work. Thanks. Are we good to move on to the next item?
Flying on to number 3.
Okay, it's financial reports. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I second it. Oh, I
No,
make
you
a motion
first
to
did.
approve.
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion? I just was looking at this, and I could be wrong the way I'm reading it. But it looks like $23,722.73 year to date on interest.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you, Chris and Mark.
Yeah,
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 I noticed.
that's a victory.
Yeah.
Sure.
that's very good.
Hey, can I ask one question about that presentation really quick? They did have a slide that mentioned the church community housing.
They did
Corporation,
discuss
right?
that, yeah.
We
Okay.
talked to them about that during the planning meeting. And
And then you sent information
to
about it.
to all of you about that because.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we'll talk about that.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to make sure I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All in favor of the financial report?
Hi.
Opposed? So voted. Okay, update the website for Block Island Housing Board, item number 5. Chris, you want to bring us up to date?
Yeah, as asked, Rosemary and I have been working just to give a bones, what I call the bones of a website, the major areas that it would have. And then as you drill down into picking those major areas, the more detail. And so I sent that to you folks. And it's basically a template to work off of. If you could take some time to look at that. I can explain it better because all I did was give you a table. And the way this works, the very top, where it would be when you first get to the home page of a website about programs, how to help, donate, contact additional affordable housing programs in Block Island. Those would be the first 5, 6 bullets. And then if you clicked on about, it would be what is our mission, enabling legislation, how to sign up for meetings and agendas, and then register your interest to be a candidate for ADU, which that's the database that we're trying to grab. Under programs, I would proposing to put our history, what we're doing right now, new ventures under consideration. Basically, that's would be the most dynamic, I think, outside of people registering for this. You know, what are we doing, keeping people up to date to that? But that would be something that would be done, you know, maybe an hour a month. How to help. This is what brought me to say that we needed a website so people can, through this, learn how to donate and the benefits of donating land or housing to us. If we do have a tax abatement because of this, you know, that would be added. But currently, right now, I think the major benefit is charitable contributions. And then donate is kind of redundant, so you can ignore that bullet. Then contact is who are we and how to get in touch with us. Then the last one was what we were talking about, linking to the other programs out here for this purpose. And then, so right now I just know of Block Island Housing as one that does what we are, has basically the same customer. And then I did a form on the back page of this website on what the data collected could be for people interested in housing, and that would be your first and second name, your mailing address, and your resident history, the type of housing, and then your estimated monthly housing budget. And if we can get people to put information in there, and I expect some like the consultant said, we have to stress to people putting this information in that this is vital to us being successful on their behalf. And I understand people not wanting to put their first name and their second name and their housing budget. So, we should expect that this data is going to be not perfect, but hopefully with enough education, people will believe that their data is secure and, give us some good guidance on what we need to work towards. So that's what the formation was of the website. This obviously is a work in progress, and if you think things are missing or things aren't needed, if you could let us know, and then we can put out, Rosemary and I were talking about putting out an RFP for website development, and that would go to people like Corey Black or whomever, basically we know that is a website developer, and say, would you be interested in providing services for us? And I read Corey's letter and she's right. It's not just developing the website, it's maintaining it.
Yeah.
And so that was really good to see that she had put that into her proposal. But I think we, you know, it would be nice to keep the work on island, but I think as a board with fiduciary responsibility, we should do an RFP and see what we get. But first of all, we have to put an RFP out that you agreed should go out. So could you take a look at this and comment back? And then we can
You
get,
emailed that. to
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
So I have just a logistical question. On, you know, on our town website, there's a Block Island Housing Board page. Are we thinking that we just have a link there that would take you to a separate, you know, separate web page altogether? Standing that that the housing board would be paying for?
I thought
I
so.
think so.
That's fine.
I think so.
Okay.
I think we should have our own IPF or whatever it is, whatever. URL, whatever it is.
Okay, great.
And Chris, you are correct. I believe anything over, I don't know, 500. Oh, I thought it was 500. 5,000? We're obligated.
Yeah, the town is 5,000.
Oh, 5,000. So we are, oh, I thought we were obligated to do an RFP.
No.
So we are, we're not.
Not with that amount of money, but, you know, we're going to talk about spending 5,000. I mentioned what I thought was, you know, big law fund. But that doesn't mean we can't go out.
Yeah.
But not overcomplicate this, you know, we could put a posting in the paper, put on the town website. Send it to the people who we know that do this kind of work. There's no problem doing that.
Okay. All right, well, my concern is timing. So you've got a great leg up on this. So if everybody could take a look at it, send your comments to Chris, because we had to get it into a format that you can present it for people to bid on.
And I understand that people bidding on it are gonna want to change stuff.
Right.
And we should put that into the RFP, you know, modification.
Yeah,
all that
yeah,
stuff.
well, I'm figuring, you know, I emailed this to Corey. But obviously what would happen is you find somebody you want to work with. And then I think you and Rosemary, if you're still willing, would work with that person. Because it would be, it is a lot of adjustment, you know, what photos, what text, what buttons.
Got to tell you this.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
it's gonna be a subcommittee
Been through
thing
that.
anyway between us and the developer. It's not, I don't think it's anything that you can just, you know, give somebody this and ask them to do it by themselves.
No, I'm in the process right now of redoing my own website, and I've been going through this for a month. So I'm
Yeah.
very aware of what we have to
All right.
do.
Because we're a public, you know, we're a public organization, we do have to be cognizant of the accessibility, website accessibility program.
What does that mean?
It's, I'll send you a white paper on it. But essentially, it allows anyone who has any kind of accessibility challenges to be able to read and understand or comprehend your website.
So
And
like hearing impaired or visually impaired?
there's a
Or-
whole, yeah, so that would probably be something worth mentioning in an RFP, assuming you go out there. And I think it's easier to build it that correctly from the beginning versus trying to retro fix, which is kind of where we're in the very baby stages of our website.
Well, if you could
Yeah, I'll send
send
that.
that to Chris.
Yeah, I sure will.
Thanks
It's,
for that.
I didn't know about that.
Makes sense. See, like, go here if you have this, or
Yeah.
like bilingual
Oh,
at least.
bilingual.
yeah, I'll
Bilingual would be important for us.
yeah.
I didn't think of that either. Okay, so baby steps, but we're moving forward. Great, okay. update on the extension of the Rhode Island infrastructure grant for the O'Brien property. Mark McGuire wrote a letter to, or wait a minute, no, he wrote a letter to the sewer and water. Allison and I spoke with the Rhode Island infrastructure grant people. Sorry, my brain's exploding. So we are good for another year. I updated you last month on the stuff that they are looking for. But I believe there's nothing time sensitive at this point.
They're the ones who want to be at the groundbreaking.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's the group. Number 7, installing the trunk line for utilities at Ball O'Brien. Kind of status quo on that as well. As I told you last meeting, we're kind of deferred until spring because we wanted to segue with the paving program. So Mark did write letters to the water and sewer, and we did receive a letter back just the other day from excuse me, this is the wrong letter. Or maybe he just resent this. Anyway, we got a letter from Keisha, the letter that I gave you from John Bruni. Yeah, is that, do you have that accessible at this point? Because I didn't keep a copy of it, I just gave it to you. And I just pulled one and it's dated 23. So I don't know whether he just recopied that old letter. I think he did. Anyway, it's a restatement.
And Dylan did the same thing, he just changed the date.
Okay. All right, so we have those 2 letters. Those 2 letters might need to go to the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. Okay. Discuss and act on potential new direction for Ball O'Brien. This is an ongoing discussion, since we obviously cannot afford what we have on the table. We need to think how we can move forward. So we've already been discussing changes of design that would require more density, bigger buildings with more units in those buildings to try to bring the costs down. And most specifically, believe that what we decided at the last meeting was we were going to try to work through with groups like Church, Omni, One Neighborhood, and find out if we have any synergy with them. If there's any way that pairing ourselves with a company like that will get us to our goals, or if we still have that huge financial gap, then we need to really in earnest look to other directions. Is that still a fair statement today?
Yeah.
Okay. So, to that end, I finally have a conference tomorrow, a conference call preliminary, just me, because they did not seem to want to have a big group, with Stephen Kearns at One Neighborhood Builders.
Nice.
So I have that tomorrow. I will report back to you on where it goes. I did have a follow-up conversation with Anthony, somebody from, or maybe it's Mr. Anthony, from Omni. Not all that encouraging. Yeah, he did get that packet that we sent him. He'll have to review it again and he will get back to me. So I'll let a few more days go by and hopefully we'll get some input from him. The other thing that has happened is Allison Ring sent me a article about Ben Frost, who is the new president of Proactive Development. Took me quite a few tries to actually get him. He works for Rhode Island Housing for the state. But I had a great conversation with him today. His job description is everything that we're looking for. in terms of assistance, identifying and screening properties in Rhode Island for housing potential, developing or supporting the development of site plans, including engineering, surveying, architectural and financial planning, and models with respect to properties supporting housing, making recommendations and assisting in the facilitation and navigation of zoning, planning, and permitting processing for housing projects, assisting cities and towns in advancing the location and development of housing in their jurisdictions, building developer capacity and attracting developers, assisting in increasing pre-development activities and sites for housing development, supporting efforts to identify and secure funding sources and opportunities for leasing, acquisition, development, construction, financing, public and private ownership, and management of housing, facilitating and implementing the financing, assembly, acquisition, leasing, permitting, and development of properties for housing. So all the sort of stuff that's, we are concerned about. Yes. I'll give that to Keisha. And so,
That too.
well, this, I can give that to, that's the third page. And he's gonna take a look at our defunct, housing board, application to Rhode Island Housing. And I will get back to him again. He said, in essence, his job description is to make it happen. So I said, well, that's
Hey.
music to our ears.
Go ahead. And it's not.
Have at it.
And the fact that he works for Rhode Island Housing isn't.
No, I mean, that's a state-run organization that should be helping our town. Now, I don't think we're gonna get any money because our parameters, as reinforced by today's slides from Weston and Sampson, we just aren't gonna fit in their
But he could still
parameters,
be.
but he could help on the other things. I said to him today, what other, I gave him an outline of the types of things that we're doing. And I said, we're also talking to Church, Omni, One Neighborhood. And he said, well, that would be one of my prime recommendations to you. So he'd still be encouraging us to go that route. So good thing that we've got that prong going. We'll give him a few days to look at our pro forma. I can send him the thing that Mark McGuire put together about the project that we sent to Church, not to Church. Or did we send that to Church? Or just to One Neighborhood and Omni? I'm not sure we did. The thing that Mark McGuire developed,
It was just one neighborhood
One-
that I
yeah.
sent.
that might be good for Church to have too. So that's my update on that. Anything else somebody wants to comment on that? Okay. Number 9, Chris, do you want to discuss this?
Hopefully this won't take much time. I was reading our enabling legislation and I read it that we should be able to get 1% from all the seasonal rentals. And then the very last sentence basically said this was just appropriate for houses. So the question I have was, can we extend this to all seasonal rentals on Block Island, this 1%? Is that going to, I think we should ask for that as part of how we increase our funding. The problem I can see potentially is that the state's going to say, no, you're imposing a tax on hotels. And I don't know if we're not allowed to do that. But anyways, I thought it was worth looking into, because the way, if we just could change a couple words in our legislation, we would have access to more funding, quite a bit. So I don't know how to, if you would like to go down this road and make this inquiry of the town, if we could look into having this done, I think it, I would have to estimate what it's worth to us, but I'm sure it's worth more than what we're getting now.
The,
It could be 0.5%. It could be, like a 1/4%, just
I think
something.
it might be a tough road.
Yep.
Legislatively.
I would almost want to try, hold that, I mean, not just keep it on the table, but hold it and explore this kind of community, land trust first. Cause I'd hate to, like you said earlier, you put put out too many things at once, we may just get all shut, I don't know, I'd rather focus on one thing that we think. might be-
Understood.
And if that breaks down, then that's, path number 2.
So currently we
Potential.
give 1% of rental houses only,
Yes.
seasonal rental houses.
Not hotels, not bed and breakfasts. Drew.
1% of that, $20 million.
Good math. I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
And that seems like a very obvious pot of money, right? Go out.
And for the people that are spending it, most of the part, I think, increasing that percentage of take for this purpose wouldn't be a hard thing to sell, in my opinion, just because it's not just a problem at Block Island, probably where a lot of these people are from, in their communities. They have similar issues, even if they're not aware of them.
So are you talking about, right now, are you talking about a hotel tax? You're talking about increasing the 1% that we already get?
I had thought that going to the hotels would be, to the, businesses that are not included in our legislation, to include them by changing our wording. But to your point, you would like to focus on the community land grant first. Increasing our current 1% of seasonal rental tax, maybe by 1/4%. I don't know, that's what, that's another 0.25.
And
It's
and I
about
think,
$50,000. So
in our legislation, Chris, that is a hard number.
Yeah.
It doesn't, unlike the land trust, which has the flexibility to change the number. They have a not to exceed number, but ours is just a hard 1%. So that 1% is collected only on summer rentals.
But I'm-
Anybody who is in residency from 30 days or longer does not pay that 1%.
or is working on the island.
Anything longer than 30 days, yeah.
Yeah. So my point is, it's 1% in the legislation. Can that be amended to be a higher number than 1%? So that's a question, and we always heard from people saying the sky will fall if you touch legislation. And to me, that's a crock. You really should be having our lobbyists kind of test the waters for us to see if this really is a sacred cow. And anyway.
One thing is, some of the stuff that we're talking about with the planning board might require going to change legislation.
Yep.
So I think it would behoove us to go once.
Yeah.
Because it really is a big process.
Yep.
We've gone
Right.
3 times, and I think I still have the black and blues from it. So it's a big process.
So I'm gonna put a motion to table number 9.
Is there anything that can be done with, like Cindy, you asked about permit fees and things like that? Is there any way to tax something on the permit fees?
For housing, building permits, that's what I call impact fees.
Impact fees,
Yeah. So other communities do it. I don't know, I don't have any idea how high our building permit fees are, whether there's room in there for more. You don't wanna kill everybody with fees and what have yous, but it would seem, just looking at the types of houses that are going up, the way that people are spending their money, not that we want to judge their situation, but one would seem that there might be a little room there.
Yeah, maybe for non-residents or something.
Maybe progressive taxes on the most expensive lots that are on the.
They are not.
No.
Okay, so progressive. That's a good word.
Can we use compassionate instead? Aggressive's got a bad rap.
I don't know who sets those fees. Does the town
town
unilaterally?
does.
Town unilaterally can do whatever they want with
I
the
don't
building
think there's any
department?
kind of cap or situation or not, but I do know they set the fees.
The
so
town
that-
does.
The town does, so I don't,
And
but
the building department obviously weighs in on that.
I would imagine that they do. But yeah, that's a good question. So I think that's a good question to kind of start with the, well, actually Sampson's, the consultant said that we should be talking to our attorneys about impact fee, but I don't know if this would be considered an impact fee in particular. I mean, I think it could just be considered, is there room for just a separate, or a portion of that fee to go towards housing? And not being
Similar to the real
specifically
estate
called.
transaction.
Right, but I don't know.
What did you call it? Got progressive there, but what did you didn't say impact. I said I was calling it impact, but you were calling it
I already forgot.
Me too.
Is it just, is it just a fee on,
just,
I mean, just, is there a fee on?
yeah,
Yeah, right.
got to get a word for it. But yeah, I think there might be room for something. And to me, building houses, affordable housing, there's a natural connection, to see if there's any appetite for that. Okay. Kind of, we're morphing into number 10. Chris, you had that.
So number 10 is about microgrids and everyone's gonna say,
Number 10 was the rental tax for seasonal rentals.
oh, I have the old agenda without.
So I
Sorry.
think you kind of covered it,
We
unless
did,
there's something more you want to say.
Yeah, sorry.
Sound like.
So now 11.
I'll go down. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Number 11, Chris.
Okay, this is a microgrid, and so I'm just going to say what a microgrid is first, define that for everybody. Microgrid is a electrical energy system that uses a multiple number of technologies to provide electricity. And the key is in times of distress, with utilities distressed, whether it's man-made, nature-made, or whatever, there is a reliable power source to it as ever connected to the microgrid. So if you think about it, in some ways, Block Island itself is a type of microgrid. It's just missing some of the components that traditional microgrids have. And what we're missing is energy storage and a brain, basically, that controls a lot of stuff. Anyways, this grant came out for microgrids, and if the ZEOS grant, which failed, was a lot along the same lines of providing energy reliability and environmental justice to people. And so, to me, this provides some funding source to us if we can work with Block Island Power Company as part of this microgrid grant. So BIPCO is going to consider this Thursday. I'm going to go to them and discuss it more. What is our advantage? Well, we don't have much. It's mostly for critical infrastructure. So is affordable housing critical infrastructure? I would say no. However, in the grant, they do talk about housing as being one of the candidates. My concept was that what we're missing on Block Island for a traditional microgrid is energy storage. And if we can incorporate an energy storage device on that property. BIPCO could isolate from that housing unit and that energy storage unit back to the power company. And in time of critical needs, we would have police, fire, rescue, and our harbors all connected and running. To me, that would give us the critical infrastructure even more so than what they initially were looking for. So then the main idea for looking at this was that it would provide funding to us. And, you know, again, we're looking for funds and it's,
How would it provide funding to us? Funding to implement storage or funding just money?
it's a study first, feasibility study, and then if it works out, then they would provide funding for the storage, for the solar, blah, 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 and probably for the interconnection hardware to make disconnecting and interconnecting seamless. So it would defray part of the cost of the housing unit development.
So are you saying that in the interim, when the critical infrastructure or the critical need isn't there, then the housing board can be, or the housing development can be using that energy and any excess energy beyond the storage needs? And then once we have some kind of a crisis, then that's cut down from the, is that what is that the
Right,
process?
you would isolate, that would be the critical power grid, because Block Island Power Company, you know, if they have the power, they can provide the whole island. It's when they start failing that you would go to your microgrid thing and you would use your energy storage. So the nice thing about this is Block Island, it runs in parallel with Block Island Power. So Block Island Power has a huge problem with its seasonality, its load shape. You know how high the energy is in the summer and how low it is in the winter, and how high it is during parts of the day and low at other times. This energy storage device, and Berkeley Labs just came out and gave a presentation to BIPCO about this, is pretty key to overcoming that problem. So it doesn't just solve the problem for us. It solves or addresses a major problem for Block Island Power Company, which is they have huge load swings.
Right.
And if they had power source they could dispatch from an energy storage device, then they can really overcome having to buy contracts for high power needs throughout the year, which normally that's how it is, even though you're only going to use less than 20% of that contract. So it's an interesting thing, at least to have a discussion with them if they would be willing to work on this with us. And again, the main reason is it provides a source of funding to us that will make us use our funds somewhere else, or allow us to use our funds somewhere else. So that's why I looked at it, and I wanted to work on that. I thought there was a deadline for the end of this year. I was wrong. I looked a little more closely, but I got a very good response from the state about this because I have some experience in microgrids professionally at utility size bigger than Block Island Power Company. So I really do know how this works. And I think it's worth trying, just like Zeos was worth trying, even though it didn't work out so well. But I'm willing to try for this, is what I'm saying. I'm hoping that you would support it.
I can't really, I got your document. I did look at it. I can't begin to say that I really get it.
It's
No.
But,
Well,
it would seem, it would seem like the power company would want to have the
Technology.
It's energy storage.
the microgrid on their property.
That's a really high risk property.
Uh,
That's in a flood zone, and we're not. And really, electrically, it just is a matter of connecting a switch and a switch.
how big of a, how big of a,
So, yeah, that's what the feasibility study would do.
like
So this
how
is,
much of the lot would you have to cover with solar and
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
so I can't answer that question because we'd have to figure out, BIPCO, what do you think you need for energy storage that you would use, a fair amount? And that dictates the square footage of the energy storage device. But we do have quite a bit of land there that's not being used. It's more like a common area. And at least it's worth a feasibility study, which costs us nothing. If we get past that and we don't like what the feasibility study says to us, then we can say, no, thank you. We're not obligated to pursue the second stage. This is just basically the first stage.
And Chris, the grant for that would cover the entire installation of the microgrid?
They
But
haven't,
nothing probably beyond that, right?
I think they're going to cover the interconnection and the interface because the microgrid needs brains. It needs to interconnect with the utility. It can't just sit by itself and needs to operate basically in parallel. So it's not just the energy storage device, but it's the components that let that energy storage device interconnect and operate with the utility. Anyway, that's,
You're gonna go to the meeting.
yeah.
And I think, from my perspective, just the communication that we're interested in partnering, if there's any.
We bring a site to the table that they don't really have. Like I said, that substation, that's in a flood zone. And they have quite a bit of land back there. And maybe that is a better place. I asked the town to consider that also, because the town can submit theirs and we can submit ours, because we are two different entities. I made sure that was possible. We can do our own and the town can do its own. So I didn't think we had anything to lose.
Keep your ears open and see
See what they
See what
say
they
on
say,
on
yeah.
Thursday. Yeah.
Okay. All right, moving on. Number 12, Fidelity Grant.
Okay, so Mark McGuire and I have worked on this a bit. I did a very rough draft and he went through it. And we have a couple of points that we need input on. And when you read the application, it reads as that we are going to be inclusive. And I'll just, for lack of better words, and let's speed this up, I'll just say politically correcting the wordings, all that, and making sure that we address all types of people in our. So I was using the phrase Latin X because that's what I've been seeing and hearing a lot of. And Mark didn't like that. And I was wondering if others in this room had an opinion on the use of that word. He just wants to use the word Hispanic. And neither one of us, like, we're not going to die on that hill is what Mark said. And I agree. I don't care. It's just what do you think is
What did you
reflective?
say, Latin X?
Yeah, X. Oh, really? It's for any gender preference or, LGBT.
Oh, okay.
All inclusive.
Oh, inclusive, thank you. So I use that instead of Hispanic, and Mark would rather use Hispanic. This seems like a very small thing to do, but Fidelity, has that as one of their criteria, making sure that we are up to speed on things.
I have so many questions, but Latin, how come it's just Latin X? You know what I mean? Is there a Caucasian X? Is there
Not to know,
Black X? Like, you know what I mean?
only Malcolm X. So just think about that. The other thing is, Mark doesn't, there's actually three things. The second thing is I put in some things in blue that I put in afterwards with red saying it's too much detail, Mark thinks, on what we have to do, and I agree with him. I just put in there because I said it's easier to put it in and take it out than try and, people will have to find it and they never would. So I put this language in, and if you could look at it, and it says, is this necessary in red? And we can easily take it out because I think Mark's right. We want to make this as concise as possible. Because if you've ever had to do grant review, it's tough. And so the more concise, the better. But we do have to address, the issues that they want us to address.
So we all received this copy, and if you could do your homework, and if anybody's got opinions, send them to Chris and Mark.
And when did you send that one? I missed that one.
Oh, I'd say within the last week.
Okay.
It looks like this.
Yeah. And the last thing is tone with the census. Mark feels I'm being critical of the census, and I want to be factual about what the census did to us. So if you could look at the language of that and pretty it up, wordsmith it, I think is what we used to say back in the day. So if it does come across as what you think unfairly critical, we should change that because even though Fidelity is definitely not the government, we thought that criticizing the government census was not a good approach. So I don't want to be unduly critical. I just wanted to be factual about what that census did to us and our ability to achieve funding through state and federal organizations.
I'm sorry, but I don't know if I'm up to speed on the Fidelity grant.
No,
That's
I'm not. I don't feel
Something that happened
like
before I came on.
So I sat in a seminar on AI and Chat GPT, and I said, why don't I try and use that to find grants for us? So I went on and I was talking through Chat GPT. I said, can you find grants for us for this, blah, blah. And it came up with 4 pages at least of grants. And one of those was Fidelity. And Fidelity, like a lot of businesses, like to give grants to their locale. So they have their campus in North Smithfield. And so I finally figured out how to get to them and ask them, are we a candidate? And finally the answer came back, yes. So Fidelity will consider us for a housing grant. So that's what I started working on.
Writing the grant.
But it's taken me months to get around to it because I couldn't figure out how to get to them to get us to be considered eligible.
Okay, yeah, I've got your letter here.
What's the date of that?
So we're trying to just finalize this and then we submit it to them, see what they say.
Yeah, and I would bring it to you before submitting it. I need feedback.
What's the deadline on that, Chris?
There's no deadline.
Rolling?
Yep. Mark and I need feedback from you to make sure it reflects what the housing board wants to put forth as a face and as an application. I'm just doing the groundwork to get it to a point where you can look at it and tune it up.
All right, try to look at that and give some comments to Mark and Chris, please. Moving on, pro forma for Block Island Housing Board. Chris,
Okay.
I think you put that on too.
Yeah, it relates to the Fidelity grant and they were asking us basically about our financial situation. And I realized that outside Rhode Island Housing, we don't have a pro forma that tells us what our income is. I haven't seen it. What our income is, what our expenses could be. What do we have to do to have a capital budget and make ends meet? So I've done a lot of financial modeling in my life, and I said, this will be no problem for me to develop. So I just put together like a 5 worksheet, work page worksheet in Excel, leaving it very vague so we can enter what we want to in there for capital costs, operating costs, income, and a few other things. And then roll it up to see what we have to do to actually be profitable. Because I don't think we know.
Was this project specific or is this just because in general, we have income, we have very little in the way of expense. So it's just when we are project specific
Right.
that then it becomes a challenge to figure out how to make the.
My feeling was we could use Rhode Island Housing, Ball O'Brien as a basis to start with. And then, we can do scenario after scenario. Like, this is what our cost is per housing unit. So that extrapolates if you have 2 to 5 reasonably. just something that we could do on a project by project basis. But let's see how the model works, pretending it was Ball O'Brien. And we had access to the capital funds, that we think we have, like Solar Initiative, RUSA, infrastructure. I think that's
That's
really
it.
it.
Yeah.
So then, okay, there's a gap. What does that gap do to our debt load? And here's our income stream based on so many dollars per unit, the management fee, the maintenance that goes along with that, the utilities. And let's just see how far afield we are, which is something that Weston and Sampson, I think, approximated, but we don't have our own tool. Rhode Island Housing, their infrastructure, their pro forma for us, I don't know if anybody went through that, but that is tough because it's for them. It's not for people like us. And so it has all these variables in there that are just not appropriate.
In the consideration of trying to manage our workloads and our tasks, it would seem to me that when we start either A, focusing on Ball O'Brien as drawn, or B, more likely, focusing on Ball O'Brien as re-envisioned, that rather than replicating effort after effort, maybe what you're talking about needs to be applied to the re-envision.
Well,
So that you're not.
I would like to test it though. I mean, just to see, because you always find, oh, I broke that link, that didn't carry through, just to make sure mechanically it works. I mean, I realize it's a project that doesn't
But
exist.
it's
Let's-
fluid. and
let's
the
check-
numbers are fluid.
Check the math,
Yeah.
basically.
If you are interested in doing it.
Yeah, I like doing that.
We'll be the cheering section.
I like, I feel like,
Actually, I think that's,
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting, Chris. Yeah,
there's
and to even try to do some analysis, going forward, when we're talking about, a project, are we talking about 100% rental project? This is what it looks like. Are we talking about a 30% or 50%, sales, 50% rentals,
Well, that's what I mean
that-
about re-envisioning, because we're gonna
Right,
need
so,
that
but
data.
it sounds like we might even be able, if we have, if we have a couple of
model.
different ideas, we can maybe look at a couple of different models and see what their feasibility is.
Yeah.
So anyway, great. Yeah, cheering, that's all.
well, yeah, in my past life, I developed a customer generation spreadsheet model that is still used by National Grid for code generation to see how a company can generate and interface and the cost benefits, all the financials. So I feel like I have experience in this area, so I should be able to parlay it for this.
You have our full support.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, update on Omni in One Neighborhood. I think I mentioned that. Oh, excuse me, discussion of possible directions for increasing rental housing, including or specifically promoting the 513s and the STR subsidies. So we've kind of been touching on
Yeah, I
that
feel like
frequently through the evening.
Yeah.
I think our time is going along here.
Yeah, me too.
I would,
go.
and people have parties to go to, but I would like to really on
What
next
area
month's
is that one?
agenda, focus specifically on ways that we can concretely promote 513s, whether we run some articles in the newspaper, or advertising, or, hopefully getting a website together that helps to promote those 513s, and then discussing the subsidies. Immediately, we don't have a funding source for those subsidies, but I think it's worth discussing the potential and seeing what we could
Right.
come up with. So let's put that on for next month in earnest. Omni in One Neighborhood, I gave you the update on that.
Could I just ask a question
Yes.
about the Omni, One Neighborhood and Church? I was just looking at their websites a little more, and do they have any kind of in-house financing that they offer with these projects, or
so.
they do?
I think so. I think, that's what I don't understand their financial model,
Yeah.
which I'm hoping to get an understanding of, because obviously they're nonprofits, but they still have to pay their whole staff, et
Yeah.
cetera. So they must have some way of partnering where, you know, they put up the front money to do the construction, but they're gonna be getting the rents. Or, you know, there must be some, I just don't understand what their financial model is. We
Yeah,
need to understand that.
I mean, more than anything, seems like something like that might be our most like, you know, that could really get things going if
Yeah.
we provide the land, they provide the funding and the buildings, and then the management and kind of work
Yeah, they must get their money back from the rents.
from the
You know,
rest.
so that's where Chris's pro forma comes in, because obviously the rents have got to be able to cover the money that they need for their overhead, as well as their payback for the $6 million that they invested in us. So,
Yeah.
so there's gotta, you know,
So I s-
basically it means we would not get any financial recompense, which is okay with me, if the
Right.
project
It's completed.
is completed and it floats.
It's functioning the way it
Right.
wants to function, and it's a
Right.
win-win, right?
Right, so that's why these companies are so interesting to us. The question that we've got to persuade them is, if we like them, is they're not that excited about our density. The scale of our projects are small enough that it doesn't give them the overhead that they need.
And that's
That's-
where we may need to just be relooking at these.
And that's the same problem with Rhode Island Housing, you know, our projects are small enough so it's not generating the kind of income that will cover their investments.
So revisiting the density thing,
Right.
while it may still not be appealing to them, even if we revisit the density, but
But they would also, with their experience, be able to take a look at our property and, you know, apologies to Barbara Bester, but they would say, well, you know, this kind of building with this type of density will get us where we need to go.
Right.
So that's the kind of guidance that we're hoping we might get from Church or Omni or One Neighborhood.
yeah, and I spoke to that summer resident who operates similar to this that I mentioned at the last meeting, and he kind of just told me to kind of keep him in the loop with what we were doing, but basically their company is kind of the same thing. They fund projects, and then they have a property management company that after the project is funded and built, then they manage it, collect the rents.
Yep.
Sometimes they sell them after they've done the development. Sometimes they keep them and manage them.
Yep.
But it's kind of a
I think that's
similar-
the same type of business model.
Yeah,
So hopefully between Church, Omni, One Neighborhood, Women's Housing Development Corp is also another one we could look at. So Chris, you're gonna be in touch with Church?
Yeah, I said, if you want to do it before, Christmas, let us know, but otherwise. we should-
Afterwards,
after the
okay.
first year. I did it with that.
And I think most of these, you know, once we get into January, most of these companies are in Providence. And it might be that we just need a field trip, you know, and make a couple appointments and sit down with folks face to face and see if we get anywhere. Okay. Member reappointments. Just to let everybody know, January is our next meeting. I can't remember the date. But we will have election of officers. So consider thoughtfully your role on the board. Always looking for new, young, energized people.
what about young?
Younger than me.
Younger than me.
Younger than me, babe. Annual schedule, do you have a?
So I
She just
just
emailed it.
Oh, okay.
I can print a couple copies if anybody doesn't have access to their emails.
I got it.
Third Tuesday of the month again, or is it fourth Tuesday?
Fourth.
Fourth Tuesday, and the question would
then
just
For
be,
the November,
So
December,
December.
those are alternative dates.
Those are alternative dates because they fall in the week of Thanksgiving and Christmas.
so you already adjusted for the holiday schedule.
So I haven't adjusted it.
Oh, you haven't?
I put the 2 dates, so it's either gonna be the 25th, it would fall on the 25th of November. So I put the 18th as an alternative date, or the 23rd of December would be the meeting date, and I put the 16th as an alternative, so.
Yeah.
Are we good at 5 o'clock?
I think I got that.
5 o'clock, okay.
I'll try to share.
I mean, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. 4 o'clock is tough for you. 4 o'clock is probably better for Millie and Keisha.
I mean, I can make
4
4
o'clock for
work once a
you?
month.
Works for me.
I can make it work.
Is there a preference for 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock?
4 o'clock is.
4 o'clock, I think it's preferable for some folks. I can do whatever, but
Josh, what's your email?
I see Keisha,
What's your email?
I see Keisha.
At Gmail.
Okay. And now I'm sorry to do this. Don't go away yet, Chris. Executive session. I'd like to make a motion to close the public meeting. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to close the public meeting.
And a second? It was Chris, okay. All those in favor? Opposed?